Future of digital assets are definitely at risk right now, and of course we'll break down what the Financial Services Committee had a chance to do yesterday. Go through a ton of clips for you guys to really kind of explain and hopefully drill down what was hours of somewhat debate between multiple House representatives as well as lawmakers. And I want to break down a lot of those clips for you guys. We're going to dive in deep. My name is Paul Barron. Welcome back into TechPath. Let's get into it today. I want to just kind of, and I'm sure many of you guys have already seen this, the Coinbase video with Paul Graywall and of course Brian Armstrong. These guys were essentially appealing to not only, I think, the industry, but more than likely the stakeholders, shareholders, etc. of Coinbase. The situation really kind of boils down into this, is that now the SEC has pretty much given them essentially a run rate, about 3 years, to comply with the requirements. Most people will look at that and say, okay, yes, but the list, which we'll probably break down in a further video, is going to be pretty daunting for them to do. I think this really gets into a scenario where they're trying to activate a lot of key people within Capitol Hill, as well as key investors, people like Cathie Wood, many of those, that potentially would start to right the ship, at least on the regulatory front, and get into a scenario where Congress and or the Senate actually gets into a scenario of passing some regulatory framework for a lot of these companies, including these exchanges. Again, I think this all boils down to a real simple thing, and it's what the committee was all about, and that is that the digital assets are such a new technology, there's so many new use cases, that there's no way that laws on the book today or regulations could even begin to set a framework for this. So I want to go into a lot of these committee clips here for you guys, and I want to jump over to our first clip, and just to give you kind of a little bit of a lineup here, I'm going to go through the hearing participants. So if you go to Patrick McHenry's page right here, this of course was the hearing, Future of Digital Assets, Identifying Regulatory Gaps in the Digital Asset Market Structure. Marta Belcher, I'll kind of give you guys a little bit of a rundown on this. This president and chair over at Filecoin Foundation. She's pretty much the representative for the blockchain industry. Then you had Daniel Gorfine, who is the founder and CEO over an adjunct professor of law at Georgetown University, Joshua Rivera, general counsel at Blockchain Capital, and then another legal expert, partner Davis Polk, and then pretty much the villain of this one, which is Miss Hillary Allen, who's a professor of law at American University and Washington College of Law. Now, I'll set up her clip. You guys will get the picture pretty quickly. This is a very interesting video to watch, and I want you guys to stay tuned as much as you can, because this really starts to showcase, and it will give you a lot of ammo to be able to understand where the future of blockchain and digital assets are truly going. Listen into this first clip right here. I want to just start it off here with Mr. Hill, and we're going to go in first.
At this very moment, Chair Johnson and members of the House Agriculture Committee are also holding a similar hearing discussing this same issue. That means that more than 40 members of the U.S. House have an opportunity to work together to ensure that our regulatory framework embodies the key principles of the same activity, same risk, same regulation. Moreover, we'll be holding a joint hearing next month of the House Agriculture Committee to explore these issues together. Two committees working hand in hand on a joint legislative product like this is unprecedented, and I believe it vastly increases our chances of getting it right.
All right, so a couple of key things there, unprecedented, two different committees joining together. We may see regulation actually come about much faster, and I feel like there's a lot of pressure coming in from the EU, obviously with MiCA. We're also seeing, I think, pressure from the innovative side of things where people are looking at it and saying, listen, the United States could be falling behind in this technology, and they kind of set it up pretty well here. This is Filecoin's intro of exactly where they stand. Listen to her clip.
While this hearing is in the Committee on Financial Services, I want to emphasize today that cryptocurrency is about so much more than finance. Cryptocurrency is already creating a better internet, providing an alternative to big tech that puts people in control of their own data. Today's internet is centralized. The vast majority of data is stored by 3 companies, Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. This creates single points of failure. When these companies suffer blackouts, large swaths of the web go down for hours. This also means that we live our lives through a handful of corporations. We have no choice but to trust them with our data, and they have unilateral control over what we can do and say online. Filecoin uses programmable money to create a decentralized file storage network. It's like Airbnb for file storage. You can rent out your digital storage space to people who pay you to store their files, or pieces of their files. A computer program regularly checks that you're still storing the files, and you are automatically paid in Filecoin. Using the Filecoin token enables the network to operate in a way that is peer-to-peer, instant, automatic, and trustless. There are thousands of individuals and small businesses serving as Filecoin storage providers. Some of them are in the audience today. They're contributing more than 15 billion gigabytes of capacity to the Filecoin network. That's enough to store all written works since the beginning of recorded history, 10 times over. That storage space is being used to preserve humanity's most important information. Cryptocurrency is about so much more than financial services, and regulating cryptocurrencies like financial services could undermine these valuable use cases. Regulations that insert intermediaries and add friction are incompatible with these technologies. It is critical that any cryptocurrency regulation protects users' ability to transact directly with each other. It is critical to recognize the open source, decentralized nature of this technology and to acknowledge our country's free speech protections for writing computer code. And it is critical to provide clarity, safe harbors, and compliance on-ramps so that innovators can continue to operate in the United States. In drafting cryptocurrency regulation, I urge the committee to consider the many valuable use cases of cryptocurrency beyond financial services.
All right, so she hit on some very key points there. Obviously, the idea of the centralized web that exists today. I think Filecoin does a good example of that. They were very well prepared here. The other thing was the freedom of speech through code. That's another angle that I think the crypto industry and in general blockchain will start to address more and more. But these two topics are going to be huge talking points. Decentralized storage, decentralized data, decentralized ID, and the idea of free speech through computer code, which is essentially a lot of what we're seeing is dynamic right now, being really kind of explained through what blockchain really means. Their attorney gets into a little bit more further here in this next clip on regulation. Listen in.
We've all heard the sirens call that trading platforms should come in and register. It sounds enticingly attractive, but it's an oversimplification that conflates registration, which may theoretically be possible, with compliance, which really is not. Registration is not simply a matter of filling out forms and sending them in. Instead, it is a substantive exercise of showing the regulator how a firm's proposed activities will comply with the existing laws and rules. Because these existing laws and rules were designed for traditional securities such as debt and equity, compliance for trading in digital asset securities is challenging or virtually impossible. To point out a couple of examples, under current law and rules, a registered exchange can generally only facilitate trading in a security if that security is registered. Similarly, broker-dealers are prohibited from facilitating trading in a security unless the issuer has taken steps to register it or otherwise make certain disclosures. This results in a catch-22. An intermediary is required to register with the SEC in order to facilitate trading, but if it has registered with the SEC, it is prohibited from facilitating trading, unless the issuer, somebody different than the intermediary that it can't control, has taken further steps and actions. As another example, in order for centralized trading platforms to operate, someone needs to hold securities for investors, but SEC accounting and custody guidance has made it legally or economically infeasible for either banks or broker-dealers to provide custody services for digital assets. So again, if a firm was to register, there would be no way for it to facilitate trading because there's nobody that can provide custody. In light of these and other challenges, absent a litany of exemptions or new guidance from the SEC, a digital asset securities that did seek to register with the SEC would have its application rejected.
All right, so I think this kind of sets the framework of today's video. Make sure and smash the like button because these kinds of videos are super important in being able to not only, one, explain to a lot of people who have not maybe entered into the crypto space or even understand what it is about, and why it's so important. If this was done in the early age of the internet, we wouldn't have seen, even though we saw a massive adoption on the internet over the several years, really seeing the bell curve rise. I think the acceleration of adoption will be much greater here on the blockchain once that people truly understand this. Now, I'm going to set this up with the villain in this film, and that is Hillary Allen. This is Professor Hillary Allen. Let me show you her Twitter. Thanks to Foreign Affairs on the opportunity to lay out the case for banning crypto. Interesting tweet right there on this, which is apparently the Foreign Affairs formerly. It seems like they're a little bit incestuous here, but the point being is this is the bad guy or bad lady on this. Listen to her first clip as she starts the approach. There's some interesting points here that we'll put together because there's a lot painting out in this hearing. Listen in.
I'd like to read you a quote from Congress in 1933. Fully half, or 25 billion worth of securities floated during this period have been proved to be worthless. I think this statement would resonate very much with those who've lost money with Celsius or FTX or any of the other failed crypto intermediaries. I believe it would also resonate with those exposed to the DeFi platform Terra Luna or any number of other DeFi scams. While I see little of value in blockchain technology, I want to make clear that enforcement of existing law is not incompatible with blockchain technology. It is entirely possible for a business using blockchain technology to comply with existing investor protection and financial stability regulation. We shouldn't dispense with those protections lightly in any circumstances, and we really shouldn't dispense with them for the sake of letting business models based on speculation and predation thrive and become too big to fail. More robust enforcement of existing laws and regulations would certainly be desirable. In particular, Congress should support the SEC's enforcement and securities registration and broker-dealer registration requirements with increased funding and with increased political support.
All right, increased funding. She's after more money for the SEC. This is a Senator Warren shill, pretty blatant and clear. This, of course, I think is also going to get dismantled in a big way in the coming clips. She doesn't do well in today, so I won't spoil it for you guys, but listen in to what Mr. Hill had to say about this.
Let me say that between March of 2000 and October of 2002, inside a regulatory framework with all the surveillance and people involved overseeing it and following every 33 and 34 Act, we lost $5.5 trillion from investors in the United States. Silicon Valley Bank just a few weeks ago, super regulated, over-regulated, massively regulated, but inside a regulatory framework. But due to lack of supervision and a terrible business policy, people lost a lot of money there. So what we're talking about today is crafting a regulatory framework that is fit for purpose and that fits the activity and absolutely doesn't undercut any fraud, anything whatsoever about consumer or investor compliance. So I don't think anybody here is suggesting that. No one on this panel supports fraud, misbehavior, lack of compliance, not following the rules, et cetera. There are digital assets like a digital sports card or a digital collectible, or maybe a token connected to an activity like a game or Filecoin that we've had described today pretty thoroughly, I think, that makes a use case for precisely what that company is doing, that are distinguishable from a security or a commodity. And these assets merit, in my view, being classified in a third category altogether, which is why the existing regulatory framework does not work. So, Mr. Gorfine, would you agree that there is a third bucket?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I would actually suggest that the problem with the term digital asset is it's incredibly broad, and I would say we have even more than 3 buckets. The reason I say that is you can effectively tokenize any asset, especially if you're tokenizing the ownership interest in that asset. So you could tokenize car title, you could tokenize title to a home, you could tokenize an actual item of digital art or ownership over existing artwork. So I think we have to be careful because the reality is that regulation looks at things through the lens of what type of an asset or an instrument is it, and we apply certain rules based on what the asset actually is. So in that sense, the term digital asset is incredibly broad, and there certainly may be items, collectibles, that fall outside of at least the securities law definition, and potentially even the way that the CFTC, for example, would view commodity.
All right, so Mr. Hill went right at Hillary there in regards to the safety and security and the fraud aspect, because there's a lot of other industries out there that are clearly regulated that have had significant problems over the very small implosion of both Celsius, Voyager, all those kind of scenarios. And even FTX, to a certain extent, if you compare it to the size of the overall financial market, just a bump on the behind of an elephant, really, when you look at it. But the other aspect he gets into on the response is the idea of classifying digital assets. I would agree with that to a certain extent. There are going to be layers of it because tokenization is going to be a function of technology. Technology can have layers within it that don't necessarily meet the requirements of a true digital asset that is equity-based, which is really where it draws the line. If it's an equity-based, there's going to be, and they'll talk about it in a moment, kind of a weighting of what is the value of equity versus the utility aspect of it. If it has more utility aspect, then it might end up being not a security. That, I think, is the clarification that the House is trying to get to here, and I think it's a good step in the right direction. This actually made me feel pretty good in the essence of these people actually, I feel like they might actually know what's going on here, and that, to me, is the biggest light at the end of the tunnel here. Let's go to this next clip on NFT Gaming, so listen to what they had to say.
I like the idea of either a gaming company that raises money to create a new game. Let's say they have to raise $10 million to create a game. That's clearly a security. It's a Reg D private placement to create the game. But if you invest in the game, you also get some tokens that are going to be used in the game if the game ever works. If the game is unveiled and nobody comes to play and it's a flop, then those are useless. But if the game's up and running a year later, those tokens have value. Are those tokens securities, or are those tokens just things in the game?
So that's where we're going to need some clarity around the potential for something to transition from being in one state maybe down the line to something else. If people purchase a token in order to help the company raise money with the expectation.
No, that's not, but that wasn't my example.
Right, this is something that's actually being used functionally within the game.
Yeah, so we'll dumb it down and make it even, for a broader audience perhaps. $10 million to create the new musical. You're going to star in it on Broadway. And if the musical goes from off-Broadway to Broadway and is successful, everybody who put $100,000 in my $10 million offering gets 25 tickets to the show that they can use for the whole run of the show. So, clearly a security. The Broadway show's a success. I'm earning a return on my investment, I hope. But I now have 25 tickets that are just a thing to go to this show. I can keep them, I can give them to my kids, I could sell them. Are those tickets a security?
And it sounds like it's a perk as being part of that.
A perk, yeah, it's an offshoot of it. And if the play was a flop, then those would have no value. So I think this is why we need to really carefully think about this. I appreciate the questions.
A pretty good response there, and I think the metaphor and the case analysis there is right on, especially when you look at NFTs, digital assets in game, other digital assets within other ecosystems that will start to develop, and many of the kinds of digital assets that will be developed in the future around not only what smart contracts will deploy, but also how NFTs will deploy, the tokenization of many different industries. All of that, I think, plays into this. It sets up a clip here on the Howie test and whether or not it's even usable. Listen into what they had to say.
The claims that there's no direction, there's no clarity, and at least that part of it. Can you speak to that?
The Howie test is all about protecting people who've invested their money in a common enterprise with the expectation of profits to come predominantly from the efforts of others. That offers scope for harm, and I think that probably accurately reflects why most people are investing in these crypto things. I think there is the clarity, but if we wanted more, Congress could pass legislation that inserted crypto assets into the definition of security in both the 33 Act and the 34 Act, and that would settle it for all time. Just to take one example, that would mean that the current crypto exchange model, with all of the conflicts of interest that is just rife in that model, couldn't continue to exist. And so customers would be protected from all of those conflicts of interest by requiring those exchanges to register.
Mr. Rivera, SEC Commissioner Peirce has noted that there has been a reluctance on the part of the SEC to quote, provide additional guidance about how to determine whether a token is being sold as part of the securities offering or which tokens are securities, close quote. In your view, would additional guidance from the SEC on this issue be helpful?
Yeah, I think it's pretty telling when one of the commissioners of the SEC has directly stated that there's reticence in the agency to provide guidance. We've been asking for this with the SEC for a long time. As they say, everything is facts and circumstances. So it's hard to say that whether something is a security is based on facts and circumstances, but everything is a security.
All right, so I think clarity here is that we've got a very dated Howie system in place. There clearly needs to be these kinds of alliances around where digital assets are going to be going in the future, and also the flexibility to be able to adjust that kind of clarity around what the future of this technology is going to bring. And this is the problem that we're facing right now, is that this technology is clearly very early, and the likelihood of it seeing much more advancement on this is real. And I think what they're doing here in terms of the House Committee is approaching in a pretty good place to secure innovation. Speaking of innovation, listen to what Mr. Torres had to say around innovation.
If the United States continues driving crypto offshore, there will be more offshore companies, more companies in the offshore deregulated mold of FTX. And so it seems to me it would be in the interest of consumer and investor protection to bring crypto into a workable but rigorous regulatory regime here in the United States. FTX fraud has no greater friend than the status quo, no greater friend than congressional inertia. New York State has shown that it is possible to create a rigorous regulatory regime for crypto without causing the apocalypse for 9 decades of securities law. Even if Congress were to pass a law that provides perfect regulatory clarity as to which assets are securities, none of it matters if there's no workable path to registration and compliance. And under the status quo, SEC registration is little more than a mirage for blockchain businesses. The number of blockchain businesses that have found a workable path to registration is close to 0. One observer put it cogently, quote, "The SEC has created a world where project founders are required to register as ice cream while making freezers illegal. Good luck." So my question to Mr. Sweehorn, how can Congress best tailor registration to accommodate blockchain technology without compromising investor protection?
If you compare the white papers that came out during the ICO boom and compare them to a prospectus, they're obviously a lot shorter, there's a lot less information, but there's also a lot of information that is not in SEC prospectuses because digital asset purchasers have interests in other topics that are not ones that the SEC in its forums have asked about.
And as I understand, Mr. Gensler himself has said that the SEC has tailored disclosure requirements to accommodate the particularities of industry. So there's nothing unprecedented about the notion of tailoring. Yeah, go ahead.
That's correct. The SEC has adopted particularized disclosure regimes for certain assets. They've not done so at the moment for digital asset securities.
All right, so it was a good example of the utility scenario that plays out versus the equity expectation, and I get that for securities. This will be a complicated matter, but I think with enough brains in the room, they're going to be able to come to something, at least with another test, similar to the Howie test, that might be able to qualify digital assets. It's not going to win every single time, but I think it might get us going in the right direction, much like MiCA going forward. So I want to listen in to, this is another clown in the show. This is Mr. Sherman. Listen to what he had to say.
Sam Bankman-Fried is out on bail, unfortunately, living in my state much better than most of my constituents. But his ghost is still in this room. He haunts the halls of Rayburn, but let's remember why he was here. Somebody else may get ahead of us in this technology. The Bahamas is ahead of us. Peru is ahead of us in cocaine cultivation. China is ahead of us in organ harvesting, and the Cayman Islands is ahead of us in financial crime. We don't need to catch up. Fentanyl is a new innovative technology. We don't need a regulatory system that rewards those who created that innovation.
We have many applications that are built on top of the Filecoin network that are business to business and that also are themselves small businesses. One example is Audius. I mentioned in my testimony the ability to say, for every second of a song I play, automatically transfer a millionth of a cent to the songwriter. And they're actually doing that, building on top of the Filecoin network. So these are things that are really revolutionizing the way that small businesses work. And it's very important not to get in the way of that innovation in order to ensure that these businesses continue to thrive.
Do you believe that blockchain technology can deliver on the industry's promise of efficiency, decentralization, and financial inclusion?
Absolutely. All you have to do is think about what happened within hours of Russia invading Ukraine. Within hours, Ukraine had posted their wallet address, and millions of dollars were donated via cryptocurrency. Why? Because it was the most efficient way to do it.
All right, so I think that was a good response and kind of sets it up for, I think, a nice crescendo here. Let's go back to the villain of our story, Miss Hillary.
All of the money and power in this town is in the pro-crypto side because crypto bros make money literally by making money, and they've made over $1 trillion out of thin air. They'll accuse the U.S. government of making money out of thin air. Maybe we do, but we're the U.S. government. What we're able to do benefits the American people in a democratic system.
And so when we talk about sort of giving capital gains treatment or tailored regulation, et cetera, to this space, we have to ask the question, why are we doing this? Traditional finance, with all its flaws, facilitates capital formation and credit allocation. Crypto does neither.
Could you provide us with some background on the use cases for Filecoin and the service that it is helping to provide?
You know, Filecoin is just one example of cryptocurrency, but it is enabling hundreds of applications and use cases. Those include human rights applications. In addition to Starling Labs' International Criminal Court evidence verification, they're also storing the USC Shoah Foundation's genocide survivor testimony archives. We also have with us here today the Prelinger Archives, which is using decentralized technologies to store rare films. We have the Freedom of the Press Foundation that's exploring using decentralized technologies for secure document exchange between journalists and anonymous sources. Guardian Project, building a mobile app for eyewitnesses that authenticates content captured on smartphones. Human Rights Data Analysis Group, exploring how this storage can be useful for accessing sensitive human rights data. Witness, we also have investigative journalists using this technology. We have enterprise use cases. There is an organization called the Decentralized Storage Alliance that uses these technologies that includes EY, Seagate, and AMD. Scientific data, not only stored by the Atlas Project at CERN, but also University of Maryland, University of Utah, and Berkeley's Underground Physics Group. And government data sets, an absolutely enormous amount of open data sets, not just the ones that I mentioned, but also the National Library of Medicine, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, National Center for Atmospheric Research, et cetera, et cetera. So there are just an enormous number of use cases, and all of those are enabled by the Filecoin network.
Thank you so much, and I yield back.
All right, so that was pretty much a slapdown right there. But here's the thing that's interesting. Filecoin is one token, one technology, one element of what is a broader base of blockchain technology that is rampant with innovation, ideas, and really creating kind of a new way to decentralize everything. To me, this is probably the most powerful aspect. If you had 50 of the best tokens out there, whether you're looking at a Solana, a Helium, many of the technologies around what we will see in real estate, medical, etc., along with storage, Filecoin. I mean, the list goes on. And I think that's the point that all this boils down to. I want to jump to our last couple of clips here. This is coming in from Mr. Davidson. I feel like a friend of what's happening here in crypto, and at least he understands where this is going. Listen in.
It's been painful. You just see people ask questions that you explain over and over and over and over and over again, and that's why it means a lot that people do take time to understand the issue. It seems that even then, you will have people that draw different conclusions. Like the only reason you would want to own these things is to evade the law. They're asking to be regulated, and not the way a lot of people are being asked to regulate it. They're saying basically, hey, could you protect our market share by making it illegal for people to actually compete with us? They're saying, let's compete. People think of the space in the same, if they can't get rid of Bitcoin altogether, they at least want to make it account-based, because they don't actually trust you with custody. Just like they haven't actually outlawed cash, but almost.
Well, we'll see how that goes. There's going to be a lot around how security plays into this, eventually digital ID. But remember, blockchain is still one of the most forensic level capabilities in terms of discovering elements and movement. So I think it actually helps general government overall. The question is whether or not we're going to see this really accelerate innovation. I want to wrap up here with a final clip coming in from Congressman Byron Donalds, and listen to what he had to say.
Mr. Donalds of Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I'm actually glad I get to go last. I heard a lot in today's hearing, and let's just be very clear. The SEC or the CFTC or frankly any other agency has not been empowered by Congress to just decide this stuff on the fly. Sorry, relative commissioners and chairmen that exist around this town, we've not authorized you to do that. I found it interesting that now Sam Bankman-Fried is now the ghost of Christmas past. You know, what happened at FTX is unconscionable, never tolerated, but that's accounting fraud. That's something that was contemplated under Sarbanes-Oxley after the Enron scandal. Mr. Zweighorn, can you elaborate on some of the incompatibilities between the digital asset marketplace and traditional financial structure marketplaces?
So in order to use Filecoin, for example, I don't believe Filecoin is a security, but if somebody did, if Congress was to say, or the SEC was to say Filecoin is a security, then everybody that touches Filecoin would need to be a regulated intermediary.
Hey, real quick, let me just say, as a member of Congress, Filecoin is not a security, but continue, go ahead. And with respect to Filecoin or anything else, I think one of the most fundamental problems we have in this building are members of Congress trying to justify why an American would choose to buy a product that they want to acquire. We're not talking about narcotics here. We're not talking about food that you ingest. We're not talking about contact lenses that go in your eye. We are talking about a digital currency or assets or token that they might choose to buy with their own United States dollar. I thought that was okay in the US. But I see not all is reality here on Capitol Hill.
All right, so I think, you know, there's another friend right there. This is a Florida congressman that is come into the picture here within this committee. I think they're starting to form now. We're starting to see where the lawmakers land. It's clear that Senator Warren is probably one of the culprits behind, obviously, Hillary, and where her stance is. But really, a very poor showing, I think, for the anti-crypto crowd or the anti-blockchain crowd, but I think a very pro showing for where this might be going. Now, can we get the agricultural committee that could come into this, you know, because I think that's going to be where it falls more on the commodity side of things, playing into this. We'll cover this for you guys, give you guys some weighted, you know, analysis on this to really understand. We chopped these clips up a little bit to get to some of the core elements and went through a lot of hours, so thanks to the Crypto Pit on great research on this. But the key here, guys, this is a video that you can share. This is one of those that if someone wants to get really educated on digital assets and what they mean, it's not just, you know, NFTs are, you know, fancy JPEGs, and really understand where the evolution of this technology is going, this is the video you want to share. So I ask that you do that. Share this video with someone, your family, your friends, your colleagues. Make sure and hit the like button, because it's one of the ways that the algorithm of course, will work to get it out there into the open and into the wild, because I think this is going to help a lot of people, especially at this stage, being able to understand how we go forward in the United States around digital assets. A lot is at stake. All right, so that's it for the day. Of course, I had a big trip over to Consensus. Thanks to everyone I had a chance to meet. A lot of in-person contact, amazing stuff. Don't forget, we're going to be at the Bitcoin Miami conference. We'll probably leave some links in for that stuff as well. We've got some giveaways that we're going to be talking about, all that good stuff. But also, if you're not in our Diamond Circle, make sure and get in. This is the #1 place you catch all of our additional content, our research, more research even on this right here will be in a video and or our Substack that only Diamond Circle members get a chance to get to. And of course, I also additional podcasts, and we do a lot of audio casts in there that are additional comments and research of my own. All that's available right there. If you guys want to reach me, it's out there on Twitter, @Paul Barron. We'll catch you next time right here on TechPath.